Hello everybody, this is a speech about the drug scene in America and it's suitable for consecutive interpreting with notes. Ladies and gentlemen, if you imagine the typical heroin user, you might think of someone sitting under a bridge injecting themselves in the arm and possibly robbing houses in order to get enough money for the next fix. Well, this is the stereotypical idea. And maybe this used to be the case, but now the demographic is very different. To illustrate this, I'll give you some figures. 40 to 50 years ago, so that's in the 1960s, 1970s, heroin addicts were mostly male, mostly black, and mostly very young. Sadly, the average age of first use of heroin was about 16 years old. But if we look at the situation today, we can see that heroin users have changed and the demographic has changed considerably. So heroin as a drug seems to have moved further into the middle classes and into the suburbs. So now we see that the average heroin user is very different. So more than 50% of heroin users are women. 90% are white, and the average age of first use is in the mid-20s, so it's definitely changed considerably. So the problem in the USA is that heroin as a drug seems to be making a comeback, which is clearly a very tragic situation. In 2007, there were 370,000 heroin users in the USA, whilst in 2013 that is increased by nearly double to 680,000. And this is a situation that is just happening in the USA because there's a very big contrast with Europe. And in Europe, the number of users of heroin has actually gone down by a third in the past decade. Many of the new generation heroin users seem to fall into heroin use by accident almost. For example, if you sustain an injury, for example, a hip injury or something that causes prolonged sustained pain, you may be prescribed something called an opioid pill, which is a derivative of heroin. And the most common pill brand in USA is called OxyContin. And these pills are very easy to get addicted to. So what may happen is you become addicted to OxyContin pills, and then when you decide you need something cheaper, you sell those pills on the black market for up to $80 a pill, which is a huge amount of money just for one pill. And then you are able to buy heroin in its pure form on the black market. Unfortunately, many people think that opioid pills are very safe, but actually they're not at all. In 2012, prescription painkillers were responsible for 16,000 deaths in the USA alone. However, to understand the heroin problem and how it's changing in the USA, we need to focus on a different country, namely Mexico. And this is because most of the heroin that finds its way into the USA actually comes from here. This is despite the fact that you may think of Afghanistan as the biggest heroin producer. And actually, it does account for 80% of the opium production around the world. Heroin production in Mexico has shot up recently, and now it's actually the third biggest producer in the world. For such a small country, that's quite an impressive feat. So what exactly has happened in Mexico which has allowed the increased availability of heroin in the USA and the fact that there is an increasing value for money associated with this product? There are two main reasons for this. Firstly, some analysts have suggested that it's due to a factor that you may not consider, which is Mexico's history of organized crime. In 2006, the president of Mexico, who is called Felipe Calderón, announced the start of his war against organised crime. This meant tackling organised crime in built-up areas, in urban areas, particularly in big cities. And this meant that, unfortunately, the Mexican military had to take their attention away from these built-up areas, away from the countryside, and focus their attention onto the built-up areas. Of course, you farm poppies in the countryside. So the fact that there was less military presence tackling this issue in the countryside meant that poppy farming flourished. To look at some figures to illustrate this further, in 2011, the Mexican military destroyed 40,000 acres of poppy fields, whilst last year they only destroyed 36,000. So you can see that there's quite a big decrease. The second reason why Mexico is able to supply more heroin to the USA is because of heroin's link with another drug, cannabis. Until recently, Mexican drug traffickers made quite a lot of money from cannabis, but now they seem to be struggling to keep up with their counterparts in the USA. And this is due to some major policy changes in the USA, which I'm sure you will have heard about. Nearly half the states in the USA have legalized marijuana for medical purposes, and 4 states have actually legalized marijuana completely. I actually read a comment in The Economist recently that said that taking marijuana to the USA was like taking tequila to Mexico. So you can see that there's really no point in Mexican drug traffickers focusing anymore on marijuana. And this is why they have turned their attention to heroin instead. In conclusion then, the problems with the drug scene and particularly heroin in the USA seem to be never-ending. There have been some programs to try and curb the increase of heroin use. For example, the recently introduced Good Samaritan laws. These laws give immunity to someone who calls 911 on behalf of a friend or someone who is present that may be overdosing. So whilst previously they may have been scared to call the police for fear of being arrested themselves, now they are immune and so they can help their friends. However, these programs may seem to some to be too little, too late. Thank you very much.